Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining our Climate Impact webinar, where we'll discuss the climate crisis, along with new insight and opportunities to address it. We especially want to bring you up to speed on the East Coast Greenway's role in tackling climate change. Not only are we making an impact now as the most visited park in America, but completing the East Coast Greenway can play a significant role moving forward in lowering emissions in the nation's largest emitting sector, transportation. For the conversation, I'm delighted to be joined by our advisory board member and leading climate scientist, Michael Oppenheimer. Then we'll get to hear a story of specific impact from our regional coordinator leading the charge in North Carolina, Sarah Sanford. Afterward, we'll have some time for Q&A, so feel free to put questions in the comments section anytime. But first, I want to share the latest news about the East Coast Greenway. Our 3,000-mile Maine to Florida vision through the region's major cities was laid out almost 30 years ago. We've made much of it a reality since then, having built 1,000 miles of multi-use greenway for people to safely bike, walk, and run to school, work, and play. We get this East Coast Greenway done by deploying an effective 11-person staff, 100 dedicated senior volunteers leading our board, our advisory board, and state committees, and several hundred engaged Greenway advocates in partnership with organizations and visionary elected and career public servants working at the local, the state, and the federal levels. We have over 120,000 supporters and followers helping the cause, just like you, through generous donations, showing up at public hearings, and spreading the good word. That's how we've already woven together over 200 popular Greenway segments and have established plans for dozens more. Our route connects 15 states and DC. It goes through the heart of 450 communities, and use has jumped to a record high this year of around 50 million bike rides, runs, and walks. In these divisive times, we bring people together, urban and rural, northern and southern, rich and poor, of all races and backgrounds. We connect people to nature and to each other. These photos are a few hundred yards from where President-elect Biden gave his victory speech in Wilmington, Delaware, on the importance of healing across America. The Greenway is a path to healing. We're developing equitable public space that fosters health through active living and vitamin D in the sunshine. In a time of growing inequality, millions of jobs losses, and the COVID pandemic, this space couldn't be more critical for our shared recovery. And it's infrastructure that tackles the climate crisis by getting people out of cars and onto bikes and their own 2 feet. People are flocking to greenways, these havens of health, sanctuaries of sanity, as New York Parks Commissioner Mitchell Silver calls them. He's part of our advisory board as well. We're so happy to have him there. In order to maintain physical and mental health in the pandemic, we're going to safe outdoor trails and parks. Greenway use has tripled in several regions, such as the Back Cove Trail in Portland, Maine. So with that background, I want to share and really jump more deeply into the climate conversation by welcoming a mentor, someone who is the rare combination of a leader in his scientific field and an excellent public communicator. He is a lead author on several Intergovernmental Panel on climate change reports and is often featured in top publications and broadcasts from the New York Times and Wall Street Journal to PBS NewsHour and even recent shows like the Colbert Report. Michael, thank you so much for taking time to join us today.
Thank you for inviting me, Dennis. It's always a pleasure. I just want to apologize. I noticed that the picture you showed of me, I was wearing the same sweater that day. as I am today. If I'd have known that, I would have changed my clothes.
It's a great sweater, Michael. I wouldn't want you to change. Yeah, they said Einstein would wear the same clothes like every day. So you're
Well,
in
let's
good
not up
company.
the bar. I don't raise the bar on me.
Yeah. Well, to start off, I'd really love to hear about your Greenway experience. Since you live so close to the Greenway there in New York, how do you enjoy the bustling Hudson River Greenway on the west side of Manhattan?
Well, I live in downtown Manhattan, and particularly since COVID, where we're all kind of trapped basically. I've been going out of my way to take a long walk every morning, 3-4 miles if possible,
Great.
depending on the weather. And I walk over to the Greenway, and I do most of my morning walk on the Greenway. And it's pretty interesting to watch. Of course, there have always been bicycles. There are a lot more than there used to be.
Mhm.
And interestingly, from my point of view, particularly Manhattan, people can be edgy with each other. The bicycles and the pedestrians haven't always gotten along so well, but things have calmed down since everybody realizes that there's going to be an increase in both and a decrease in car traffic, which we're all appreciating. So
Yeah.
I think the pedestrians and the bicyclists are going to take back a lot of what has been stolen from us by uh, our car-dominated society, and things will be different after COVID comes to an end.
Absolutely. I mean, that's how we build back better. That's
That's right.
Commissioner Jeanette Sadiq Khan, has done a lot of work in that area around Times Square and elsewhere. It is so critical because right now, cars and roads, they take up so much of the public space. But hopefully we can get some of that back for everyone to enjoy.
And by the way, you see that also restaurants have been allowed to open up, not just on the
Mhm.
sidewalks, but in the middle of the street.
Wow.
And that isn't going to be reversed very easily
Mm.
either. And once there's a constituency for it. And so at the end of all this, I hope becomes an organizing point for reorganizing not just New York, but other urban areas, and to let function, aside from spewing fumes, come back to the middle of the city.
Absolutely. Yeah, and that's that sort of transition that's going on where we had this big shift during COVID. It's disrupted our lives, it's changed our habits. I haven't played basketball in 10 months,
Oh
but
my
on
God.
the yeah, on the more serious side, we can't even there's challenging notions like you're not supposed to hug older parents and grandparents, and it's a huge challenge for us. Um, and
Absolutely.
and at the same time, we've had this, as the one result from COVID crisis that we are looking at as somewhat of a silver lining is this temporary reduction in emissions, largely due to fewer trips, to work and vacation. U.S. emissions projected to fall by 10% this year, and global emissions by around 5%. But there likely will be an emissions rebound, of course, next year and the years ahead. And so I just wanted to look at, what are the metrics that you're looking for? I hear Rhodium Group saying 4.3% per year to get to net zero by mid-century for the United States. Bloomberg New Energy Finance is talking about, well, global emissions need to fall 6 to 10% per year to stay in that 1.5 to 2 degree increase in Celsius range. So, what level of reduction are you looking for us to achieve, and sort of as your gold standard?
Well, I'm not going to give you a single number. I'm just going to
Yeah.
frame what you've already given us, which those numbers are right. But what you have to remember is that a lot of the world is still in growth mode. These are developing countries which have a right to develop. It's the northern countries versus the global south in a certain sense for a limited pie if you want to really stay below 2 degrees Celsius or even better. And that means when you put the US's obligation in context, we really have to do better than the 4 or 5% that sort of looks like our share of global emissions reduction, because that's not the way it's going to work out politically. The countries that are still in their growth era, they want to solve this problem too, but they have a right to sort of turn the curve uh, a little more slowly than we might, because we've been hogging the atmosphere for more than a century.
Right.
So I think you have to think between those two numbers as the growth reductions, the emissions reductions that the U.S. should aim for.
Yeah.
We might not make it. We might wind up exceeding 2 degrees. That's not the end of this. That's not the end of the world. It just means adaptation gets a lot tougher,
Yeah.
and the sooner we can get out of that danger zone, the better.
Absolutely. Yeah. But I want to go to a slide to just talk about what we have done lately in the United States. A bright spot is this part of the national story that I'm really impressed around is the dethroning of coal in the United States. The past 15 years, you see that sharp drop. So coal has plunged over 50% from its 2005 high. And renewables, as you can see in this graph, actually passed coal last year. And this year, coal's predicted to fall another 18 to 20% as renewables keep growing. So has this part of the story in the United States surprised you?
Well, it surprised everybody going back 20, 30 years when
Yeah,
we thought the potential was there, but that the price was much too high. The
right,
speed with which renewables dropped, the ability sort of politically to get away from coal, which was somewhat which somewhat mobilized by the availability of natural gas, but which we now have to get behind as quickly as possible, get over. Uh,
mhm,
but starting 4 or 5 years ago, it became apparent that this isn't going away. And now the next challenge is to see similar price drops and growth in consumption or demand growth in the storage sectors,
right,
which batteries, for instance, which make the spread of renewables then that much more rapid. So we're on the verge, I think, of really, we are in an energy revolution. We could tip the balance here much quicker than anybody 20 years ago would have expected. The obstacle is political, it's not technological.
mm,
And that means we're fighting uh, incumbents, as they're called, in the system, uh, power companies that don't like renewables, coal companies, oil and natural gas that have a built-in position. And we have to keep them from further building themselves into that position. Of course, with a position of the technology, with a position in the economy comes political power and just slows down the whole transition. The transition is inevitable, but it makes a huge difference whether it happens over the next 15, 20 years, say in the power sector, or the next 30 or 40 years, which is what, say, Florida Power and Light would prefer.
right, right. And so a lot of that story was in the power sector around coal, of course, and renewables. I want us to talk a little bit now, jumping into the transportation sector, which is now the more challenging decarbonization area. And one thing I'm really focused on is, okay, if we can dethrone coal in 15 years, can we do the same to oil, in the next 15 years? And I'm excited about the growth in EVs, and Tesla price is coming down. Just like you said, the price of batteries is going down as well. So, do you see that strong potential for oil to be dethroned? And then maybe we can throw up another graph real fast about this, because right now in California, which I see as sort of the future, in a couple of years we'll be there, and the East Coast as well. Transportation's 41% of emissions, and so how do you see us tackling that 800-pound gorilla and getting emissions down in that more stubborn sector?
Well, more than with the non-transport sector, the transportation is basically tied up in the American lifestyle in a way that has to be broken through. And I don't know whether we're going to come out of the pandemic with people realizing that spending half their lives in automobiles wasn't a good idea, that living in dispersed settlement didn't save them from the pandemic, which a lot of people thought in the beginning, and that there's another way to live their lives, which is more favorable to both the environment and their personal and psychological well-being. But that's a hard one. We're asking for a norm transition in society. We're asking for a transition in the way people envision their own lives. And that's the level that has to be fought at, in addition to the technological level, which seems to be coming along nicely, and in addition to the political level, which is going to be a hell of a fight, because the oil companies are big and powerful, and they're not going to want to give up, as I said before, their incumbency. Big companies, if you look at history, there aren't that many of them that had a big sunk investment in a natural resource that they just gave up to try something else. I really think that it's more likely that the oil companies will fight to the bitter end, and then somebody else will replace them, basically, and that somebody else will be not purveying oil. So I think this is a huge political fight that people have to be ready for. And again, it's also a question about the norms. What does society expect? What kind of society do we expect to live in? And can we learn to live in a society that's more friendly to public transportation, to walking, to bicycling? That's a restructuring, which, it's sort of underway now, but not nearly fast enough. East Coast Greenway plays an important role there.
Appreciate that, Michael. And we try. We're trying to move things, and I am so happy that we now have 50 million bike rides, runs, and walks. But as a symbol, I want to now overtake I-405 in LA, which is the busiest road in America. They have around 135 million trips per year. So that's what I've got my sights on now for this decade. Let's see if we can do that.
I would never underestimate you.
Well, we've got a great team, and you're a key part of that, Michael. I appreciate it. So I wanted to talk, about hope a little bit, and how you've been at this for decades, and you remain at least somewhat of an optimist. I'll let you decide how you want to grade yourself on that, but just to be able to continue to focus on this. We've had a lot of improvements. 2007 was when emissions peaked in the United States and Europe, many of the so-called advanced economies at the time. And so, but since then, we haven't gone down globally in emissions. It's continued to go up generally, though last year it stayed about flat because of these emerging economies, just like you've talked about. They continue to utilize coal, especially. So what gives you hope that we can turn that trajectory downward?
Well, first of all, in order to have hope, you have to see the big picture for a long period of time. I wouldn't be doing this anymore if I were headed for despair or pessimism. There's been in a way, we've done great things. We, not me, but the world has done some great things already. There is a transition underway. The issue is how can we do it fast enough? And so what I don't let myself be daunted by is the idea that we absolutely have to get the temperature from warming more than 1.5 degrees, because I think that's very hard. And if that objective seems to slip away, I don't want people to think game over. It's just not the case. There's more to do. It's a heavier lift. But on the emissions side, we're going to get it done. It just means we will have cut out for ourselves a tougher task in terms of adaptation. And I use the term we loosely here. When you think about who we is, it's mostly people around the world, most in the global south, who don't have the resources to handle the impacts of climate change that were mostly built on the emissions from the global north. Mm-hmm. And there are people in our country who are also poor, who don't have the resource, or not so poor, but just don't have the resources to pick up and run every time a big hurricane threatens the Gulf, as happened repeatedly this year. They don't have the resources to face extended drought and times when all of a sudden there's a wildfire coming, and they're wiped out, and they don't have insurance. What do? Those people here and in other countries are the big part of the problem when adaptation is talked about, they have to be taken care of. We have to figure a way to make adaptation not an individual homeowner does something, but a collective action of society. And if we can do that, which also requires a norm transition, I think that we'll be okay, even if the temperature winds up passing those very tough thresholds in the Paris Agreement by a little bit.
Right. And that goes back to a great point that you made when we were on that river relay walk and that lunch where you gave a talk. And you brought up the fact that greenways and parks, they're not just mitigation, but they're also adaptation. And for key places like post-Hurricane Florence in the Cape Fear River region in North Carolina, we've got to get the people moved away from the river a little bit so that, and not just people, but other serious assets. That was another key thing in New York with post-Sandy. So could you tell us a little bit more about that adaptation and how it can play a role alongside mitigation?
I work a lot on the sea level rise problem, which is not just about higher seas and coastal erosion and disappearance of coastal land permanently. It's also about worse flooding during coastal storms.
Right.
And we're seeing all of that play out. It's all begun to happen. And areas that are very dense and very valuable, it's likely society will eventually decide to build defenses near them, and those defenses won't be just concrete. There'll probably be mixtures of enhanced wetlands, some barriers to the ocean, and importantly, the need to pull out of certain areas and give them back to nature to create buffer zones. When you give an area back to nature, you can give it back to walking, you can give it back to bicycling, you can give it back to multi-use activities. That's the way they need to think about this problem. We don't have the money to pour concrete all over the place, and we don't want to do it because it wrecks the environment. But we'll do it in some places where it makes sense economically. In other places, it just doesn't make, nobody's got the money to pay for it. So we're going to be doing more nature-based defense. And even in cities like the one I live in, there's going to be a lot of nature-based defense because even this rich city, New York, can't afford to defend all the wetlands along the southern part of Queens and Brooklyn, for instance, Staten Island, down the Jersey coast. It's too much.
Right. Right. No, it's so key to be doing that. And the great thing about it is you can use it 90% of the time when it's not flooded. But
Right.
then when it is, everyone can step back and we don't hurt when we step back.
That's right. I want to put an asterisk on that. The city recently made a decision to scrap a community agreed upon plan to have a multi-use floodable zone on the east side of Manhattan, and instead replacing it with a hard wall. So this battle hasn't been won yet.
Absolutely. But we're winning some of those battles. We haven't, the wars continue.
We'll win many of them. We'll win because the money isn't going to be there.
Right, right. But that goes to one of the things that gives me hope right now is that economists agree we need fiscal stimulus right now to help us recover from what we're dealing with right now in terms of the COVID crisis. And so to really build back better, I have a lot of hope in Greenway stimulus being a part of that, investing in EVs, investing in solar and things like that, but really making sure that we get something to the tune of $10 billion that would transform the biking and walking experience all around the country. And it has a great return on investment for communities, economically, and for health, and for the environment. It's also producing a great deal of jobs. When we look at highway construction versus greenway construction, the job creation in constructing greenways is 50% more per dollar, than for highways. And it's something that we're working with a lot of organizations all across the country on. And we're really proud of that effort. And we also team up with key partners like the Transportation and Climate Initiative in the Northeast that's trying to be visionary and think through how do we deal with these key issues in a way that's lowering costs, really dealing with the equity issues. Not everyone can buy a Tesla, right? But we could lower costs for transportation by being able to bike and walk safely and conveniently where we want to go. So I just wanted to bring up one of these areas that gives me some hope, and that we need to act on right now. It's really the opportunity of a lifetime right now, where we're going to decide these next couple of years whether we really do build back better, or, with trillions of dollars that are spent, or we just go with the status quo and send 80% to highways and roughly 20% to transit, and then some crumbs to biking and walking. No, why don't we go 50, 30, 20? Some mix like that that really lifts up the potential in the future. So are there any other elements that give you hope about what the Biden, the president-elect, can do working with Congress to try to move forward in this moment?
Yeah, well, it's the working with Congress that has to have a little asterisk on it also. We don't know what's going to happen with the Senate.
Yeah.
I just want to say that it's very rewarding to see that the idea has taken hold of integrating the approach to rebuilding our society around the concept, the green concept, the concept of reducing climate change and other environmental insults at the same time. I always thought, and you can go back, check my 1990 book where I wrote this, that looking at the whole, all the other problems we have, or most of them, through the lens of climate change gives you a bunch of solutions that can be multiple winners, multiple co-benefits, multiple political benefits by bringing in different constituencies. That's the point that people have begun to make now. It seems the Biden administration buys that, although we'll see when reality hits. So that tells me we all have to be out there, not just bicycling, not just walking, but pressing our representatives in Congress, Senate, Congress people, and the administration to keep on that message and to really get the job done. The pressures will increase. The president has 4 lead topics he's mentioned. There are some like COVID that it's clear has to get done. But after that, and after they get the economy re-going, but simultaneous, not after, simultaneous with getting the economy going, we have to do the stuff that's going to help us on climate. And most of all, we have to avoid doing things that are going to hurt us on climate change. That's it. Bottom line, and everybody's got to go out and press on that. Exactly. Let your voices be heard.
Amen. No highway robbery anymore.
Right.
We've got to invest in the right things for public health, for the environment, and for us coming together as a society and really becoming again the United States of America. No, absolutely. Well, Michael, thank you so much for this wonderful conversation. And please do stick around for Q&A in about 5 minutes. But for now, we're going to turn to our North Carolina and Virginia leader, our regional coordinator, Sarah Sanford. She will give us a more in-depth local view of the Greenway's climate impact. The mic is yours, Sarah.
Great. Thank you, Dennis. Hi, everybody. As Dennis said, my name is Sarah Sanford, and I'm the Virginia and North Carolina coordinator for the East Coast Greenway Alliance. I'm based at our headquarters in Durham, North Carolina. And I'm going to give a quick presentation to zoom in on a case study on the Greenway in North Carolina. So the map here on the left is the entire East Coast Greenway, as you've seen. And then there's that little red circle, which is around the triangle region of North Carolina. So for those who don't know, in the triangle, the East Coast Greenway goes through Durham and Cary and Raleigh and continues east. And the triangle is special not just because our headquarters is there, but because the triangle is the most complete metro area of the entire East Coast Greenway. So we have just a little over 70 miles of continuous off-road traffic-protected greenway that stretches from the north side of Durham and continues south through Cary and Raleigh and continues east, as you can see in the map on the right. So if we go to the next slide, we can see that the East Coast Greenway in the triangle is made up of a bunch of different local, regional, smaller greenway pieces that are all stitched together. And it passes through some of the largest population centers in North Carolina. So again, Durham, Raleigh, the capital. And the Greenway is used by a wide variety of people, whether it's commuters that are biking to work, parents taking their young kids out in strollers like you see in the photo here, folks who are walking their dogs, people exercising, and people who just want to spend time in nature. So really all sorts of people using the Greenway for all sorts of different reasons. So a few years ago, in 2017, the East Coast Greenway Alliance commissioned a case study report to be done. Alta Planning and Design was the firm that did this, and it looked at the impact of the East Coast Greenway in the Triangle region of North Carolina. And so we had the consultants look at a number of different aspects of the benefits of having the Greenway, which included economic benefits, health benefits, environmental benefits. Right now, though, we're just going to focus on the environmental benefits. So you can see in the slide here, there's a number of health and environmental benefits that come about from having this complete 70+ miles of East Coast Greenway in the Triangle region. You can see at the top there, it's over 11 million miles biked per year, over 7 million miles walked per year, and huge healthcare cost savings that come about from folks who can get out and exercise on a greenway right by where they live. But the number we really want to focus on here is that one at the very bottom. So 1.14 million fewer pounds of CO2 are emitted each year because of the presence of the East Coast Greenway in the Triangle. So in other words, having the East Coast Greenway as this resource for people to get around and not use their cars, but bike and walk instead, essentially removes over 1.1 million pounds of CO2 emissions from the atmosphere each year. And keep in mind, this is just in the Triangle, so we're still talking local. In addition, this report was completed in 2017, long before the COVID-19 pandemic hit. So we think that all of these numbers would likely be much higher right now due to the huge increase in the number of people using the Greenway currently that Dennis was mentioning earlier. So what does it look like to use the Greenway to mitigate climate change? In terms of the big picture, it essentially means that people are traveling a lot less in cars. So you can see in this slide, the last statistic from the case study shows that people are driving less due to having the East Coast Greenway in the Triangle region. They're driving 1.4 million fewer miles by car each year, to be exact. So again, what does this look like example-wise? It might be going from a 2-car household to a 1-car household. It might be biking to work or walking to work or to the grocery store. Or it could be using a combination of transit and biking and walking to get around. So none of these types of changes are radical changes. In fact, these lifestyles and behavior changes are commonplace in many other parts of the country and the world. And of course, the Greenway is not the only clean transportation solution. It's a key clean transportation solution that goes hand in hand with the use of buses, trains, and other forms of transit for those longer distance trips. So zooming back out to the big picture, looking at the East Coast Greenway again as a whole, the Triangle, again, that red circle right there, the Triangle is just one region of North Carolina. So inside that red circle is those 70 miles of continuous greenway that I talked about. And as I said before, those 70 miles of greenway contribute to 1.1 million fewer pounds of CO2 emitted into the atmosphere each year. So if we extrapolate that number and look at the greenway as a whole, when all 3,000 miles of the East Coast Greenway are complete, we're looking at a potential reduction of around potentially 25,000 tons of CO2 emissions per year, which is really significant when it comes to mitigating greenhouse gas emissions and climate change. So the environmental benefits that we're seeing now regionally and in regions like the Triangle, where the East Coast Greenway is already complete, those benefits can and will apply on a much larger scale as we continue to develop the East Coast Greenway and build out all 3,000 miles of the Greenway. So on that note, as we work to develop the Greenway, we do need your help to do that. So right now, I'm going to wrap it up and pass it back to Dennis to share with you a few different opportunities that you can be involved in to help develop the Greenway.
Thank you, Sarah. It's so exciting to see the progress that y'all are making in North Carolina. And next, again, we do want to hear from the audience. We want to hear what questions you have for us. While you're typing in questions, I do want to share 3 small items. One, we're hosting a big bike ride next June from New York to Philadelphia. And if COVID's persisting and we can't host it in person, we're going to host an amazing virtual experience for you. So do check out updates at greenway.org/events for info on that, and also to sign up in the weeks ahead. We have about 300 riders, but would love many more. Now, second, I really want to make sure everyone sees our social media accounts, and so that we can share the good Greenway word. So I want to go to that slide as well. It's really important for us to get that word out and really get more and more key stakeholders involved. And lastly, please do donate to keep our visionary and transformational work going strong. Donations up to $20,000 by year end will be matched by one of our generous donors. We're a thriving nonprofit, fortunately, but we depend on people like you stepping up to tackle the climate crisis by giving to the East Coast Greenway. You can give at greenway.org/donate, or by giving stocks. I just had a call during this presentation from someone giving stocks. Or you could give through legacy giving, thinking about in your will, how do you want to make an impact that lasts for generations, bringing joy and connection with nature to generations to come. Would love to have you as part of our giving team, legacy giving. Now, let's go to questions. Sarah, what questions are you seeing for us?
Yeah, we've got a lot of great questions here in the comment box. And I just want to mention again, any more questions are welcome. Go ahead and just drop them in the comment box. The first one that Dennis, I think you can address this one easily. Eric asked, are people currently using the East Coast Greenway to commute or just for exercise? And I think that we can definitely speak to that one.
Excellent. Well, the answer is both, definitely. I mean, certainly some people use it recreationally. It's a very important recreational outlet for us, for that sanity, mental health, and just to keep us going strong. But also, we're seeing a lot of commuters. And actually in New York, the top bike commuting corridor is indeed the Hudson River Greenway. And we see that in other areas, other cities throughout the East Coast and other towns. And the more we connect and develop our Greenway and then have it as a network that's connecting with all the neighborhoods around it, that's how we can make it a transformational corridor in terms of carbon reduction. Great question.
Yeah, thank you, Dennis. Another one that came up is earlier Michael had mentioned this term of countries that are in the growth era, developing countries that are still growing. So one question was, how do we help those countries that are developing, that are in the growth era, come to develop in a way that is not so reliant on cars the way our culture is in the United States?
Well, that's a tough question because, of course, we can't control what other countries do in that regard. And we certainly, in the spectrum from technology to norms to politics, we have not much to say about their politics or their norms, especially. We can share technologies more liberally. We can reduce trade barriers in certain cases, probably, while being aware that we're trying to grow our own homegrown renewable energy industry also. And a lot of it has to do with knowledge sharing. Some of it, as an educator, one of the most important ways that we help other countries is by letting their students come here. That's a mutually beneficial relationship. Some of the best science done out of the universities I've worked in has been done by collaboration between students coming from other countries and students on our own country. And, the disruption of that interaction has been one of the most damaging characteristics of the administration that's just about to come to an end. So I think that we have to, with the question of how to help them, we have to remember it's not them helping us, helping them necessarily. It's a two-way relationship. One of the reasons that solar photovoltaic cells exploded because the price went down, the reason the price went down had a lot to do with a partially coincidental and partially intentional relationship that developed between Germany and China. China made a bet on the solar photovoltaic market at just about the same time that Germany was putting in some of the most stringent requirements for, and incentives, I should say, also for going to renewable energy. And we have to look for those opportunities because they're not just about the US. And what's happened as a result is China is now on an emissions path that may, yield more progress than our own path has recently, at least. And that's because they have the production facilities there. Now, again, I think it's very important we home grow our industry. But if the Chinese had not engineered a collapse in the price in cooperation with the Germans, we wouldn't be in a place to take advantage of that either.
That's a great point. And, Germany, just going back to them, one of the ways that they did help is by leading by doing, leading by example. And the amount of solar that they deployed, not only did it help the market, but it showed that it was possible. And so I think what we can do, through solar, wind, but also through greenway development and development of biking and walking networks, is leading by doing here in our country, especially in a place like New York that's such a global center. That's all eyes are always on New York. So if we can develop the right mechanisms, we can change the norms in New York, that can help us spread that sort of positive change all around the world.
That's an incredibly important statement you just made.
Well, on that note, we have one question I think would be good for both Dennis and Michael to answer. Daniel asked, how can the Greenway help fight the climate crisis in rural and suburban areas where biking and walking distances might be longer? Compared to those urban areas where it's a little easier to get around, what about the rural and suburban ones?
Yeah.
You want to take that first, Dennis?
Sure. So, what do we need in a community? And that's changed a bit during the COVID crisis because we aren't transporting ourselves quite as much. There's still a lot of moving of goods, you've got the Amazon or whatever, the mom and pop stores hopefully also delivering as well. But we do have trips to downtown, so we can there's still great examples of small and medium-sized cities making a big impact by setting up great regional networks for biking and walking. As we talked about, all the co-benefits that come from it. It's a healthier community. It's a higher quality of life, and that's where people want to move. That's what we're seeing. Raleigh-Durham's home market is booming right now. And when businesses, when the leaders like the mayor of Raleigh is encouraging new businesses to come and have their HQ in their city, they're talking about greenways. They're talking about the high quality of life. And so I think it's a really important element for smaller communities, medium-sized communities to really develop so that they can bring in the top quality of new potential employers and the top quality and employees as well. And I think you see that in places like Durham, where a lot of people are attracted to the city. We have a long way to go. We still need to keep developing the greenways and trails, but I think there is a big role. And that's that report that Sarah went through, the regional impact in a more suburban context than the high metro area with strong transit. I do also just want to mention transit is an important part of this, and how the first mile and last mile, how do we get to transit, is through safe walking and biking. We've got to establish that, and then both transit and biking and walking thrive together. And that's how we can really set it up so that it's convenient, it's fun, it feels good for public health and quality of life, and we've got significant emissions reductions.
Yeah, and let me just add to that quickly that it's not just a matter of some big change that has to happen over several decades. I can't tell you the number of times I've gone to stay with friends who lived in medium-sized cities and small places, even say in California, where, we need to get something to drink. They hop in the car. Where's the store? 2-3 blocks away. Insane. But a lot of people got used to doing that. And I think there's been a bit of a turnaround in that regard, but we still have, it's just like energy efficiency. There's a huge amount of low-hanging fruit in that idea of shifting from getting in a car all the time to doing it on a bike or walking. And, that's just a matter of getting people to realize that they're not doing themselves any good and they're not doing the world any good by just hopping in the car every time.
It's an excellent point. Yeah. And half of US trips are less than 5 miles. That's a lot of short trips that we could be doing biking and walking. Right. Not all of them, but a lot of those trips.
And most of that is at low speeds, high air pollution, high CO2, low energy efficiency.
Yeah. Big opportunity for positive change.
Yep.
Absolutely. Those are great points from both of you. Well, Dennis, we are coming up on time here. So what do you think? Should we do one more or wrap it up?
Michael, can we do one more?
Sure.
Thanks.
So we had a good question from Judy on Facebook that came in while we were just having that discussion about how do we impact the suburban areas and the more rural areas. And Judy asked, what can citizens, people who don't work at the Alliance, but the folks who want to use the Greenway, what can they do to help with this Greenway movement and getting more bike and pedestrian infrastructure everywhere?
Well, I think we need to listen to the experts like Michael Oppenheimer and really take these issues seriously. And not only just personally, but that we talk to our federal officials and say, look, we know that we're going to be spending $1 trillion, $2 trillion, maybe $3 trillion in these next couple of years. Let's make sure that we spend that in a smart way. It's enhancing the quality of life and it's lowering emissions through Greenway stimulus, through the East Coast Greenway as a mega project that's national transformation. And that we're doing all the other right things that Michael Oppenheimer's sharing with us that we should be doing.
Amen to that.
Well, it's such a pleasure talking with you, Michael, and Sarah, as always. Let's continue this great work. And we've got a president-elect who's saying he's ready to work on this. So let's see if we can help make sure that his administration does indeed make a big difference on this important issue. Thanks, y'all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
Bye.
Bye-bye.